A stranger fixed her car in rain, but his hidden past shocked everyone. The afternoon sky had turned heavy, a gray curtain rolling slowly across the quiet suburban street. The usual warmth of the day seemed to vanish as clouds thickened overhead, smothering the sun in their restless folds. The air carried that electric tension before a storm, the kind that makes every sound sharper, every shadow deeper. Thunder rumbled in the distance, low and warning. Within moments, the sky broke open, and rain poured down in cold, relentless sheets. Drops struck the pavement, hard, creating ripples and puddles that quickly spread across the road. The smell of wet asphalt and earth filled the air, mixing with the metallic tang of the storm. On the side of the road stood a woman, no older than 28, her dark brown hair plastered to her face, strands clinging stubbornly to her skin. Her blouse, once neatly pressed, was soaked through, clinging to her like a second skin. She hugged herself with one arm, shivering against the chill, while her other hand clutched a phone that offered no comfort. Each attempt to call for help was met with the same bitter response. No signal. Her car, an aging sedan, sat lifeless with its hood slightly ajar. The engine had coughed, sputtered, and given out minutes before, abandoning her in the worst possible moment. She stared at it now as though sheer willpower might bring it back to life. But the rain drowned out even her thoughts, hammering against metal, glass, and the empty road stretching around her. She tapped the phone screen again, her hands trembling, not from the cold alone, but from the rising wave of panic she struggled to push back. She had somewhere important to be, a meeting she couldn't afford to miss, one that could decide her future. Every passing minute felt like a betrayal, as though time itself had turned against her. Her eyes darted down the road, hoping to see headlights cutting through the storm, but there was nothing. Only the rain, the thunder, and the hollow sound of her breath quickening in her chest. She pressed the phone to her ear again, whispering desperate pleas under her breath, though she knew no one was on the other end. Her shoes sank deeper into the softening ground by the roadside, water seeping in, chilling her toes. She wrapped her arms around herself tighter, her body swaying slightly with exhaustion and frustration. She wanted to scream, to let the storm swallow her voice, but instead she closed her eyes and fought to steady her breathing. The narration of her thoughts was simple, raw. Why now? Why here? Why me? Every second that passed seemed louder, heavier, as though the storm itself was mocking her helplessness. The road was empty, the world indifferent, and she was just one small figure fighting against forces far larger than herself, time, weather, and fate. And yet, though she couldn't see it, something was about to change. The storm wasn't the only thing moving closer. The rain showed no mercy. It fell harder now, washing the street in silver streaks, turning the gutters into rushing streams. The woman pressed her phone to her chest, water dripping down her arms as she fought back the sting of tears. She thought she was alone, but from the far end of the road, another figure moved slowly through the storm, a man in his early 40s, his frame strong but slightly hunched against the downpour, walked with measured steps. His jacket was too thin for the weather, dark fabric clinging damply to his shoulders. In one hand, he held a grocery bag tucked tightly beneath his arm, shielded from the rain as best he could manage. The bag sagged with weight: bread, fruit, maybe milk, everyday necessities carefully carried home. His shoes were worn, the sawless, caked with mud from paths he'd walked too many times before, yet there was something steady in his presence. Despite the storm, he did not rush. His movements carried a quiet resilience, the kind built from years of pushing through life's harder storms. As he drew closer, his gaze lifted and he saw her. The young woman, stranded by her car, her hair plastered to her face, her arms wrapped tight around herself as if she could disappear into the rain. He watched her fumble with her phone again, her desperation plain even from a distance. His steps slowed. For a moment, he hesitated. Experience whispered caution. He knew too. Well, how people sometimes looked at him, at his skin, at his clothes, at the weight of stereotypes they carried in their minds. He knew that approaching a stranger, especially a woman alone, could invite suspicion, fear, even anger. The thought pressed heavy in his chest. What if she recoils? What if she thinks I mean harm? He shifted the bag beneath his jacket, standing. Still as the storm drenched him, he could keep walking. Pretend he hadn't seen her. Spare them both the awkwardness, but compassion tugged harder than caution. Because beneath the thunder and the rain, he recognized her helplessness. He knew that look, time slipping away, frustration clawing at the edges of composure, fear buried just beneath the surface. He had lived it himself, and something within him refused to ignore it. Taking a quiet breath, he stepped off the sidewalk, his shoes splashing in shallow puddles as he approached. His posture was careful, unthreatening, his voice low when he finally spoke. "Ma'am," he said gently, raising a hand just enough to show peace, not intrusion. "Looks like you could use some help." The woman startled, turning sharply toward him. For a heartbeat, uncertainty flickered in her eyes, mingling with exhaustion. The rain drummed around them, a heavy silence settling between two strangers on a lonely road. But the man did not press closer. He waited, steady as the storm raged on, his grocery bag still tucked beneath his arm. His kindness unspoken, yet unmistakable. In that moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, balanced on the fragile edge between fear and trust. The woman's grip on her phone tightened the instant he spoke. Her knuckles turned pale, her thumb hovering near the screen as if ready to dial a number at the first wrong move. She took a half step back, the pounding rain splattering against her soaked blouse, her breath quickening. Her eyes searched his face, dark, unreadable in the curtain of rain, then dropped to his muddy shoes, his damp jacket, the grocery bag clutched under his arm. A stranger, a man, alone with her in the storm. Every instinct screamed caution. She swallowed hard, her chest tightening as her mind spun. What if he's dangerous? What if I made a mistake even looking at him? The world had taught her not to trust so easily, especially now, stranded and vulnerable. Yet another voice inside whispered of her growing desperation. The tow truck hadn't answered her calls. Time was slipping away. The storm wasn't letting up. And here was anyone offering help. Her eyes flicked back to him, suspicion still shadowing her face. He didn't step closer, didn't press her for an answer. He simply stood there, shoulders bent against the rain, his voice as steady as the rhythm of thunder rolling above. "I understand," he said quietly, reading her hesitation without judgment. "You don't know me, but I've fixed a few cars before. If you'd rather I keep walking, I will." There was no urgency in his tone, no push to persuade. Just a calm certainty, as though he was leaving the choice entirely in her hands. He even gave a small shrug, the faintest smile tugging at the corner of his lips, a smile that was patient, not demanding. Something in that steadiness softened her. The woman's chest rose and fell as she battled herself. She imagined calling anyone to come save her. But the storm drowned her chances, and she knew it. She imagined standing here alone another hour, drenched, late for the appointment that had already been slipping away with every passing minute. And then she looked at him again. The lines on his face etched not with menace, but with weariness. The way he kept his hands visible, his body language deliberate and careful, as though he wanted her to see that he meant no harm. The war inside her eased, just enough. Her phone lowered slowly, still clutched in her hand, but no longer a shield. "Okay," she said at last, her voice quieter than the storm. Just take a look, please." She stepped aside, her movements hesitant, as if testing the fragile trust. Hanging between them, the man nodded once, acknowledging the risk she had taken in that moment. He shifted the grocery bag beneath the edge of her car to keep it dry, then walked to the front of the vehicle. With practiced hands, he found the hood release and lifted it open. A hiss of steam mixed with the pounding rain, rising from the engine like a weary sigh. He leaned over, studying the tangled machinery while she stood back, phone still in her grip, heart still cautious but no longer locked in fear. For the first time since the storm began, she felt the faintest flicker of relief. And beneath the gray, roaring sky, two strangers stood together, no longer divided by suspicion, but slowly, quietly, by trust. The rain fell harder now, hammering against the car roof and drumming on the asphalt like 1,000 frantic hands. The woman shivered, wrapping her arms around herself as the storm soaked every fiber of her clothing. She was about to offer him her umbrella, then remembered she didn't have one. Before she could say a word, the man shrugged off his thin jacket, worn and frayed at the edges, and stretched it over the open hood like a makeshift shield. The fabric darkened as the water beat down, but it kept the worst of the rain off the engine, giving him just enough cover to work. She blinked at him, startled. He's getting soaked just for me. His movements were calm, deliberate. His fingers broad, calloused, the hands of someone who had worked long days moved with surprising agility. He leaned closer, wiping away the steam that rose as the rain kissed the hot metal, squinting into the maze of wires and valves. There was no hesitation in the way he traced the lines of the engine, no fumbling or second-guessing. Each touch seemed purposeful, each adjustment carrying the quiet authority of experience. The woman's breath caught. She hadn't expected this. He didn't just look like someone trying to help, he looked like he knew what he was doing. The disbelief flickered across her face as she watched his hands move, almost instinctively, as though he had done this not once or twice, but 100 times before. Between the roar of the rain and the low rumble of thunder, she caught fragments of his murmurs. He wasn't talking to her so much as to the machine itself. Loose connection, not firing, just need to. His voice was steady, the words almost drowned out by the storm, but his calmness anchored the chaotic moment. She realized she hadn't spoken in several minutes. She was just staring, half in awe, half in guilt. Awe at his unexpected skill, and guilt at how suspicious she had been. Her mind replayed the look in his eyes earlier, the patience in his tone, the way he had waited for her to decide. And now, here he is, fixing the one thing I couldn't, while standing in the rain he doesn't deserve to be in. Suddenly, a spark. The engine coughed once, twice, then roared awake with a guttural growl. The sound was sharp against the storm, like defiance. Against the heavens themselves. Her jaw fell open. She hadn't even realized she'd been holding her breath until it escaped in a long, trembling exhale. Relief surged through her body, warm even in the cold storm, flooding her face with light. Her shoulders, once stiff with worry, dropped. As though a great weight had been lifted from her, the man stepped back, lowering the hood with a careful push. Rain now streamed down his shirt, plastering the fabric to his skin, but he didn't seem to mind. He wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, smearing grease across his temple, and let out a quiet sigh of satisfaction, more at the success of the repair than at any recognition he might receive. For the first time since the nightmare began, the woman felt something other than fear or frustration. Gratitude swelled in her chest, unexpected and overwhelming. She looked at him, not just as a stranger in the rain, but as the person who had given her back control of her day. The car purred steadily beside them, its rhythm a promise that she was no longer stranded. The engine continued to hum steadily, a low and comforting rhythm against the chaos of the rain. The woman stood frozen for a moment, still stunned that the nightmare she had been drowning in only minutes ago had been resolved so swiftly. Gratitude welled up in her chest, spilling over in the form of shaky breaths. She fumbled with her purse, her cold fingers trembling, as they dug past damp receipts and car keys until they closed around her wallet. Her heart thudded in nervous urgency. She had to thank him properly. Money seemed the only fitting way, the only way society had taught her to repay such a kindness. Withdrawing a few folded bills, she extended them with both hands, her voice breaking through the drumming of the storm. "Please," she urged softly, almost pleading, "take this. I can't let you leave without something." The man looked at her outstretched hand, the soggy bills fluttering in the wind like trapped birds. For a brief second, his dark eyes softened, reflecting not greed, not triumph, but something quieter, something almost fatherly. Then he shook his head. Not with irritation, not with pride, but with a firm kindness that left no room for argument. "Don't do this for money," he said, his deep voice calm yet resolute. Carrying easily over the rain dot, her hand lingered awkwardly in the space between them. She felt a rush of embarrassment, the color rising in her cheeks despite the chill of the storm. Slowly, she lowered the bills back into her purse, her throat tight with guilt. She realized that in offering money, she had reduced his act of compassion to a transaction, when in truth it had been something far more human, far more selfless. The man gave her a polite nod, the gesture respectful and final, as though thanking her silently for the offer, but refusing to let the moment be tainted by it. Then, without waiting for acknowledgement or praise, he turned slightly, clutching the grocery bag tighter under his arm. His thin shirt clung to his frame, soaked through, his worn shoes sinking into the growing puddles. He seemed ready to disappear back into the storm, swallowed by the gray curtain of rain as quietly as he had appeared. But then, something caught her eye. As he shifted the wet jacket back over his shoulder, the fabric flapped just enough to reveal the inside lining. Stitched into the worn material, faded but unmistakable, was a small emblem. A crest, elegant and sharp, its threads glinting faintly even in the dull light. Her breath hitched. She knew that logo. The emblem belonged to the world's most prestigious luxury car manufacturer's, one that built vehicles far beyond her means. She had seen it in glossy magazines, on billboards, in the sleek advertisements that promised excellence and exclusivity. Yet here it was, tucked inside the old, fraying jacket of a stranger who had just saved her from despair. She blinked rapidly, unsure if the rain had deceived her. But no, it was real. The stitching was too deliberate, too precise to be a coincidence. Questions surged through her mind, colliding with each other like waves. Why would a man like him, dressed in worn clothes and muddy shoes, carry the mark of luxury beneath his jacket? Was he once someone else, someone from that world? Or was there a story buried within him, one she could never have guessed? The storm raged on around them, but in that moment, the woman felt as though the world had gone still. The man glanced back at her briefly, his expression unreadable, then gave a faint, almost knowing smile before taking another step into the rain. She clutched her purse tighter, her heart racing not from fear this time, but from the unsettling mystery that had just unfolded before her eyes. The gratitude she had felt only moments earlier now deepened into something else entirely, a profound, gnawing curiosity. For a long moment she stood frozen in the rain, her mind circling the emblem she had glimpsed. That single detail pulsed in her memory, brighter than the flashes of lightning overhead. It didn't belong there, stitched inside a jacket so frayed. At the edges it looked ready to fall apart, worn by a man whose shoes squelched in the mud and whose bag of groceries clung precariously to the safety of his arm. Why would someone like him, someone with hands that moved like a mechanic's butt, eyes that carried years of unspoken stories, carry the mark of such prestige? The crest wasn't the sort of thing one stumbled upon. It was stitched carefully, deliberately, reserved for uniforms, jackets, or keepsakes that carried weight and pride. She couldn't shake the thought that it symbolized a life far different from the one his appearance suggested. Her chest tightened with questions. Had he once been an engineer, designing the very machines she only dreamed of affording? A technician, trained to understand engines with the kind of intuition she had just witnessed? Or she dared to imagine, had he once lived a life of success? A man whose name might have graced offices and glossy brochures, only for fate to strip him of it all? The stranger shifted, preparing to step fully back into the storm. It was as though he wanted the mystery to remain, to let her memory of him end with a running engine and a nod of kindness, but she couldn't let it go. Her voice slipped out before she could stop herself, trembling with curiosity. "That emblem on your jacket," she called out, her tone a mixture of hesitation and urgency. "It's from a luxury car company, isn't it? How do you have it?" The man paused mid-step. For a fleeting moment, the rain seemed to still between them. His back was to her, his posture heavy with something unsaid. Then, slowly, he turned his head just enough for her to see the edge of his profile. His expression carried no anger, no annoyance, only the weariness of someone who had been asked this question before and had chosen silence as his answer. A faint smile tugged at his lips, but it wasn't the same reassuring smile he'd given earlier. This one was softer, sadder, almost apologetic. His eyes met hers briefly, and in them she thought she saw entire chapters of a story he had no intention of telling. "I should be going," he said simply, his voice calm but final, and with that, he adjusted the bag under his arm and stepped into the downpour, his figure swallowed gradually by the sheets of rain. His silhouette blurred, then vanished entirely into the gray horizon, leaving only the echo of his footsteps and the hum of her revived engine behind. The woman stood rooted to the spot, drenched but motionless. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, reminding her of the appointment she was late for, but she didn't move. Her mind was tangled, replaying the brief exchange, the stitched emblem, the man's measured silence. Gratitude still swelled in her heart, but now it was joined by something else, an ache, a gnawing curiosity that refused to fade. The storm had passed a stranger into her life, but left her with more questions than answers. Who was he really? And why did she feel that she had just brushed against the surface of a story much larger than herself? The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the streets washed clean and glittering under the pale sunlight. Yet inside her chest, a storm still churned. The woman moved through her routine in a daze, her car now working, her day back on track, but her mind refused to let go of the stranger in the rain. By the time she arrived at her office, she knew she couldn't keep it to herself. Over coffee in the break room, she began recounting the story to her boss, a man in his 50s with sharp eyes and a memory for details. She spoke quickly at first, painting the scene of her car breaking down, the pouring rain, and the unexpected kindness of a stranger. Her boss listened politely, nodding here and there, until she mentioned the emblem. "It was stitched into the inside of his jacket," she said, gesturing with her hands. "The logo from your old company, wasn't it? That luxury car manufacturer." It caught me off guard, because, well, he didn't look like someone who belonged to that world, but the way he worked on my car, it was like second nature. I swear, he knew exactly what he was doing. At those words, her boss's expression changed. The casual smile drained from his face, replaced by something taut and unsettled. He set down his coffee slowly, as if afraid it might slip from his grip. "Wait," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "What did he look like?" She described him, the worn clothes, the careful movements, the steady calm in his presence. A black man in his early 40s, carrying a grocery bag, polite but withdrawn, his eyes shadowed with stories untold. Her boss leaned back, disbelief flickering across his features. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years, he spoke. "I think I know who you met." The room seemed to shrink around her as he continued. "Years ago, there was a man at the company, brilliant, one of the best mechanics and engineers we ever had. He wasn't just fixing cars, he was shaping the way we built them. Innovative, sharp, ahead of his time. People said he could listen to an engine and tell you its secrets. His voice softened, tinged with reverence. But then, everything fell apart. Her boss's gaze hardened with the memory. There was an incident, a catastrophic mistake in one of the prototypes. It cost the company millions. He swore it wasn't his doing, and many of us believed him. But the higher-ups needed a scapegoat. He was young, black, outspoken, and easy to cast aside. They pinned it all on him. His career ended overnight. His name was dragged through the mud until it disappeared altogether. The woman's breath caught. Her fingers tightened around her coffee cup as the pieces began to align. Her boss shook his head slowly. He vanished after that. No one knew where he went. Some said he left town, others thought he'd given up entirely. But if it's really him you saw... His voice trailed off, heavy with both wonder and regret. Silence hung between them, broken only by the hum of the office lights. The woman felt her heart ache, not just for the injustice he had suffered, but for the quiet dignity with which he had carried himself the night before. He hadn't told her. He hadn't needed to. His kindness had spoken louder than any title or reputation ever could. For the first time, she understood. The stranger who had saved her wasn't just a man passing through the rain. He was a man who had once stood at the height of brilliance, whose legacy had been stolen, yet whose spirit had not been broken. And somehow that truth made his simple act of kindness all the more extraordinary. The revelation clung to her like a shadow, following her through the rest of the week. At night, when the rain returned and tapped against her window, she found herself replaying the moment under the storm, his steady hands, his quiet refusal of money, the emblem hidden in his jacket. It wasn't enough to simply know his story. She felt a pull stronger than curiosity, stronger than guilt. It was a sense of responsibility. So she searched. It wasn't easy. He had no social media presence, no phone listing, nothing that connected him to the life he once lived. But word travels quietly in small communities, and after asking at a local grocery store and following whispered directions, she found herself in a modest neighborhood on the edge of town. There, under a leaning street lamp, she saw him again. The man was kneeling beside an elderly woman's porch, hammer in hand, mending a broken railing. His jacket was gone this time, his shirt sleeves rolled up, revealing strong forearms marked with years of labor. Around him, children played in the puddles left by the last storm, and neighbors waved at him as though he were family. For a moment, she just stood there, watching. The sight unraveled something inside her. The unfairness of a man once celebrated, now reduced to odd jobs, and yet the grace with which he carried himself, never bitter, never demanding recognition. Gathering her courage, she approached. He noticed her and straightened, surprise flickering in his eyes before it softened into that same patient calm she remembered. "You again," he said gently, brushing the dust from his hands. "Car trouble already?" Her throat tightened. "No," she managed, shaking her head. I came to thank you. Not just for fixing my car, but for what you showed me." Her voice trembled with sincerity. "You didn't just get me back on the road. You reminded me what real strength looks like. Humility, kindness, integrity, even when the world hasn't been fair." For the first time he seemed unsettled, his gaze shifting downward as if unused to such words. He shrugged slightly. "I just do what I can." But she wouldn't let it end there. Not this time. Over the following weeks, she used every connection. She had friends, colleagues, even her boss who still carried guilt over what had happened years ago. Piece by piece, the truth emerged. Documents that had been buried, witnesses who had stayed silent out of fear. The company's rush to find a scapegoat. And at the center of it all, a man whose brilliance had been stolen, whose dignity had nearly been erased. The day his story went public, she was there beside him. He stood awkwardly before cameras, his hands clasped, humility radiating through his discomfort. Reporters called him a wronged genius, a voice for resilience, But he only smiled, faintly, and said, "I never wanted fame. I just wanted fairness." She looked at him then, not as a stranger who once fixed her car, but as a man redeemed by truth, a man whose quiet strength had lit a fire in her own heart. And in that moment, she realized her gratitude had come full circle. He had given her hope in the rain, and she, in turn, had given him back his name. Word spread quickly, faster than either of them could have imagined. At first, it was whispers in small circles, neighbors who had known him only as the quiet man with the kind smile, suddenly hearing about the brilliance of his past. Then came the articles online, the photographs of him standing humbly before microphones, and the revelations about the injustice that had destroyed his career years ago. The story ignited something in the community. Doubters who had once crossed the street to avoid him now found themselves ashamed, their prejudice crumbling beneath the weight of truth. Where once there had been suspicion in their eyes, there was now admiration. Children who used to see him as just the man who helped patch roofs or fix bicycles began to hear his name spoken with reverence, as someone who had once shaped cars admired across the world. For him, the sudden recognition was disorienting. He never asked for applause, never longed for the spotlight. Yet when he walked to the corner store, strangers stopped to shake his hand. Neighbors began to drop by not only with broken tools or loose wires, but also with words of thanks. Some simply stood on his porch to tell him they were proud, that they were sorry. He accepted each gesture quietly, never boastful, but the calm in his eyes deepened, as if a wound long hidden inside him had finally begun to heal. The woman watched all of this unfold with a quiet sense of wonder. She had not expected her gratitude to spark such change. To her, he had been a stranger in the rain who chose compassion when he could have walked past. Yet that single act had rippled outward, transforming lives and reshaping stories, hers, and those of countless others who heard. One afternoon, weeks after the storm, she found herself driving down that same suburban road where they had first met. The sky was bright now, the air clear and warm. She slowed her car and looked at the exact spot where she had once stood, drenched, frightened, and alone. The memory returned in vivid detail, the trembling hands, the feeling of hopelessness, and then the steady voice that had changed everything. Her chest tightened, but this time with gratitude rather than fear. She realized that life's most profound shifts often begin in the smallest, most ordinary moments. A broken car, a passing stranger, a choice made in silence. His name, once tarnished, now shone with quiet dignity across the community. And though he never sought to reclaim what had been stolen from him, the woman's gratitude had done just that. It restored not only his reputation, but also the faith of those around him in the power of humility and truth. In the end, the injustice of the past no longer defined him. What defined him instead was the rain-soaked afternoon when he chose kindness without expecting anything in return. And sometimes, that was all it took to change the course of two lives and perhaps an entire community. The story did not end with the repaired car or the revelations of a man's past. In truth, that moment on the rain-soaked street became something far greater, a quiet lesson whispered into the hearts of all who heard it. The woman carried it with her every day. She would often catch herself replaying the image. A man in worn shoes, shielding a grocery bag under his jacket, stepping forward when he could have easily walked past. His choice was not about recognition or reward. It was about compassion, about doing the right thing even when the world had been unfair to him. And that was what made it unforgettable. True kindness asks for nothing in return, the narration reminds. The woman had learned this in the most humbling way. She had offered money, thinking that gratitude must always come with payment, but he had refused because his help was never a transaction. It was an act of humanity, pure and unshaken by bitterness. The world had stripped him of titles, careers, and recognition. Yet it had not stripped him of dignity. nor the courage to extend a hand when someone was in need. And in that moment, standing in the rain, the woman realized she had not just been given help with her car. She had been given a glimpse of the deeper truth, that some of the strongest people walk quietly among us, unnoticed, carrying stories of both injustice and resilience. As his story spread, others came to see the same lesson. Neighbors began to speak differently, not only about him but about each other. They understood that worth was not measured by clothes or houses or the way someone appeared in the rain. Worth was carried in actions, in choices, in the integrity that refused to die even when the world tried to silence it. One man's quiet courage in the rain became a legacy of hope for generations to come. His act reminded people that even the smallest gesture, a hand reaching to steady a broken engine, a smile offered, despite suspicion, could shift the course of lives. The woman knew she would never again look at strangers the same way. The next time her instincts warned her to distrust, she would remember the rain and the steady voice that calmed her fears. She would remember that the very people we doubt might be carrying stories that could teach us, heal us, even change us. And so the story lived on, not just in the woman's heart, but in the community, in the whispers that turned to admiration, in the children who grew up hearing about the man who once fixed a car in the storm. It was a lesson written not in textbooks or speeches, but in the quiet bravery of a stranger who asked for nothing and gave everything. Because sometimes, it takes the simplest act of kindness to reveal the deepest truths about justice, humility, and the enduring strength of the human spirit.